Hey guys, it's Christian. For this video, I kind of want to switch up the format for the complete filmography review. And for this one, I kind of wanted to do like more of a Marvel skew to it. So for this one, I want to do a complete Marvel filmography review where I choose a filmmaker who's done multiple films within the Marvel Cinematic Universe and go through them and give all my thoughts. And for this one, I wanted to do the Russo Brothers. I'm a really big fan of the Russo Brothers. They're probably some of my favorite filmmakers, like as you can see from my collection here. So I just thought that they'd be a good one to kind of test this new format out. So without further ado, let's jump in. So first up, we have Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and this one's probably my favorite just solo Captain America movie. Like I obviously love Captain America: Civil War, but I think with this one just feels like the most like realistic, the most grounded. There's just like the most tension filled with it, and I think because the Russo brothers and the writers, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, along with Kevin Feige, they were really inspired by like 1970s political thrillers like 3 Days of Concord. And I know Robert Redford was a star in that movie. So it's really funny that he's actually in The Winter Soldier as the main villain. So I think that's really cool, like Easter egg that they have in there. But yeah, I mean, there's just really cool action, really cool suspense, really cool drama, a lot of twists and turns. And speaking of action, the action scenes are just like really intense and like they're just really, they just keep you on the edge of your seat. Just starting off with the opening scene on the Shield vessel where, Captain America and Black Widow have to like infiltrate the vessel. Initially, their mission is to, just rescue it because it's been taken over by pirates, and, they have to like rescue all the Shield agents that are, held up within it. But then, Black Widow has her own secret mission that Captain America finds out, which I think is like another cool aspect about this movie is just kind of like the relationships that form. They're like the characters like really like grow in this movie, especially Captain America. He has his whole arc of he starts off being very patriotic. This is like post first Avenger and then post the Avengers. He's very compliant with the government, and this is like the movie where he really kind of finds like the cracks within Shield and like the overall government and everything. And I think one of the biggest twists in the movie is just the fact that Hydra has been operating within Shield this entire time, and they have like the Winter Soldier with Bucky Barnes after his accident, and they brainwashed him to kind of be this assassin throughout the decades to carry out all these different secret Hydra missions and assassinations. And one of them is the Stark parents, that like Howard Stark and his wife were killed by the Winter Soldier, and that gets brought up later in Civil War, which we'll get to in a bit. Yeah, there's just like a lot of like just political intrigue that's involved, and just the big twist of Shield collapsing at the very end, and the whole mission of like Project Insight of having like these kind of like targeted assassinations with the helicarriers and everything. I know another inspiration for like the writers and the directors were like Edward Snowden with like like the leaks with like what's going on with like target assassinations and surveillance. And that's a theme that they wanted to bring up in Winter Soldier, where Captain America is kind of struggling with this whole idea that Nick Fury presents to him about like I thought punishment came after the crime, and Nick Fury saying like Shield takes the world as is, not as we want it to be. And this whole tension, I think it's just like a really good setup for the turn that Captain America has. And then obviously we'll get more to that with Civil War, with this whole turn of like kind of going rogue and everything. But I just feel like this is really like where the Marvel Cinematic Universe got like really serious. Like they really like set the tone with like the first Iron Man movie with like how serious it is, and then it kind of becomes like more comedic as it goes along. With other movies that came in, like Thor gets kind of like goofy at times with like Dark World, and then Iron Man 2 and 3, there's like some drama there, but there's still some goofiness. But really with like Winter Soldier is like really where things really got tense and serious. And I mean, like I said before, with the whole collapse of Shield, and now the characters on the run, like Captain America, Black Widow, Maria Hill, and Nick Fury are kind of on the run, so to speak, or like they're kind of like making their own way moving forward in the cinematic universe. So yeah, I just thought like that was really a cool aspect to it. And I know like the Russo brothers and Marcus McFeely, like they really, with these Captain America movies, especially the sequels, they really want to like push the Marvel Cinematic Universe forward. I know like Joe Russo is saying a lot, like he wants to have like disruptive storytelling where you think like the story's going to go one way and then suddenly there's like this left turn that's really unexpected. So I really appreciate that he kind of has that theme, that the Russos and the writers have this kind of theme throughout their movies, like throughout all the other movies like Winter Soldier and Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame kind of has that through line of like disruptivity within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah, another aspect is just like the politics of the movie. Like I know I kind of mentioned it briefly, but yeah, you just don't really know whose side like you really want to be on. Like kind of like I was saying before with the theme of like Captain America and Black Widow not really trusting each other at the beginning. Once they infiltrate the Shield ship, they think it's just gonna be like a hostage situation where they have to, Cap had to fight off Batroc and get rid of all the pirates and then free the Shield agents. But then Black Widow has like her own secret mission to find the data on the thumb drive that had eventually we find out has the kind of secrets to the helicarriers with their whole targeted assassinations, and the whole theme of like trust, like who do I trust, like are you really who you say you are, and all this stuff. And then it kind of gets brought up again with Captain America and Nick Fury, where he visits the Triskelion, and then he's kind of having that confrontation with Nick Fury of like, I can't go on missions unless I know like who my teammates are, or that's why it's called an army, and then people aren't just like shooting around aimlessly with guns because everyone has the same agenda. With this one, Nick Fury is ordering Black Widow to have this kind of secret agenda going on, so they just don't really know who they should trust. And then it kind of gets brought up where Nick Fury is trying to figure out like what's on his thumb drive, and then he's like locked out of it. So then he confronts Alexander Pierce about it, and then they have like their whole confrontation of like what's going on. Like I don't really know what's happening, and then eventually leads into like that epic car chase, which I know is like an inspiration. French Connection was an inspiration for that, and then you realize that Shield's been compromised, and then Nick Fury gets away, and then meets up with Captain America and tells him that Shield's been compromised. And then before they can figure out like what's going on, that's when the Winter Soldier shoots Nick Fury, and then Captain America has that chase, and then the mystery kind of goes on from there. So yeah, I think it's really cool. Like for the first half of the movie, you don't really know what's going on, and then Steve Rogers has his confrontation with Alexander Pierce, and then Alexander Pierce is like someone killed my friend, like I'm gonna find out who it is. And then the whole epic elevator fight scene where finally Cap is like broken free of Shield, and now he has to team up with Black Widow and find out like what's going on with this whole mystery going forward. Yeah, I just really appreciate the fact that Captain America and Black Widow are like teamed up with each other, because with the first Avengers movie, Captain America is really he's like the Boy Scout and everything. He's like really wanting to follow orders and everything, and then Black Widow is obviously like the really shady character. So I really appreciate that they paired those two up with each other. And then eventually when they find out that Arnim Zola was kind of like the ghost in the machine, and then reveals that Hydra has been secretly operating within Shield, and then all heck breaks loose with the bombs of the camp that was featured in the first Captain America movie, and then kind of go from there. And then yeah, I just really like appreciate more of like the twists and turns that go on, where eventually Steve Rogers finds out that the Winter Soldier is Bucky Barnes, and after he had his accident in the first Avengers movie, he falls down the side of the cliff face after they're having like that kind of train job heist scene, and then Hydra kidnaps him, brainwashes him, and then he becomes like this kind of sleeper agent throughout the decades. So I think that's like another theme that's really cool as well, of like how you can be best friends, become enemies, and then become like friends again. And I think that's a theme that gets carried on throughout, this movie, and then especially Civil War. It's like, how far will you go to help your friend, who appears to be an enemy, but deep down they're still really good. The whole line at the very end where it's like I'm with you to the end of the line. That scene where Captain America and Winter Soldier are fighting with each other at the very end on the helicarrier as it's going down, and then that kind of awakens Bucky within his kind of Winter Soldier persona, and then that kind of begins the process of his redemption that we'll get to later with Civil War, and then eventually with Black Panther and Avengers. I appreciate that they kind of have that through line throughout the kind of Captain America trilogy of this kind of relationship between Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, where like they're best friends. And then in the first one, Bucky Barnes was really much kind of like the dominant personality. He was obviously the one who was very much built to be a soldier, and then Steve Rogers was like this scrawny kid from Brooklyn. He's like, I can do this all day and all that, getting beaten up in the back of the movie theater. And then Bucky was the one who kind of had to come and defend him, and then but Steve Rogers still still had the heart within him. And then, obviously, as we see in the Winter Soldier, he becomes Captain America and then becomes the hero. And then, he kind of overshadows Bucky a little bit, so the dynamics kind of switch. But then, as the events go on, and then, Bucky dies, and then, he gets kind of reunited in Winter Soldier. They're very much like equals, where, they're both men out of time. They're both kind of like super soldiers. They've been experimented on, and like one's been for good, one's been for evil. And, now they have to kind of come together as equals, and then, kind of figure out, their place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe moving forward. So yeah, I appreciate that kind of through line throughout the Captain America trilogy, and then how it kind of continues on into Infinity War and Endgame. All right, now we move on to Captain America Civil War. And yeah, this is just another one of my favorite movies. I think I kind of qualify this more as like Avengers, as a lot of people say, Avengers 2.5, because a lot of people were disappointed with Avengers Age of Ultron, and like they think that this one is the Avengers movie that we should have gotten, and I kind of totally agree. I guess first off, we just start off with the action sequences, the beginning action sequences with the B-level Avengers kind of going against Crossbones, who was introduced in The Winter Soldier as Brock Rumlow. He was kind of like the ally turned enemy in that one, and then after the whole, helicarrier crashing into the Triskelion, he was all, burnt up and everything, and you think he was dead, but then he gets taken away like on the stretcher, and then he gets kind of like, I guess, reincarnated in Civil War, and becomes Crossbones, and then obviously has a bone to pick with Captain America because it's like, hey, you blew half my face off and all this stuff. So yeah, they have their rivalry there, but yeah, that's just like a really cool just like opening action sequence to kind of wrap up the kind of storylines that were set up in Winter Soldier, and that kind of carried on throughout Age of Ultron, and then establishes this rift that sort of forms where after the Avengers battle Crossbones, he kind of does this kind of like suicide bomber thing where he tries to blow himself up, and then Scarlet Witch, who was introduced in Age of Ultron, does her magic and then tries to like lift him up in the air so that no one in the village will get killed, but then she doesn't lift him up quickly in time, and then he ends up exploding, but it's like right next to one of those kind of medical centers, and then a bunch of innocent people get killed, and that's what kind of starts the rift of Civil War. So yeah, I think just another theme that is really important in this one is the theme of the Avengers being put in check, because I know that was like a big criticism in like a lot of the kind of early 2010s superhero movies, especially, like the Avengers, and then, like Man of Steel for DC, is that in sort of superhero movies, like the very end, there's this like whole big battle in the middle of the city, and, like buildings are getting destroyed, people are getting killed and all this stuff, and there's really no consequences. So I appreciate with this one that's kind of like the theme that kind of starts the rift within the Avengers, where Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross comes in, and then he kind of has the Sokovia Accords, because the whole Battle of Sokovia at the end of Age of Ultron was this kind of like globe-shattering battle. Obviously a lot of people got killed. There was a lot of destruction, and Thaddeus Ross wants the Avengers be put in check. I like that scene that he has at the beginning where they're all kind of in the boardroom, and he's showing them clips from the other Avengers movies, like Battle of New York, and Battle of Sokovia, and then the Washington DC Triskelion battle from Winter Soldier, and then showing like the people, the ground level, like the people's point of view of like dodging all this like debris that gets flown around, and like these buildings that are collapsing on them. I think that was just a good like element to bring into these Avengers movies to kind of like make it more realistic and keep the characters in check. So that obviously creates the divide within the Avengers. Tony is all for the Accords, that they need to be put in check, because the whole theme of him in Age of Ultron, creating Ultron, and feeling responsible for the destruction of Sokovia, and that scene in MIT where he's talking to the mother of one of the victims who were in Sokovia, who was killed during the battle with Ultron, and he feels that guilt and that shame from that. So that's a really good motivator for him. And obviously with Age of Ultron, he was trying to create like a suit of armor around the world and everything with Ultron, but obviously that went terribly, and he feels guilty. So I really appreciate that was a really good motivation for him to be for the Sokovia Accords. And then obviously with Steve Rogers, with being loyal to S.H.I.E.L.D. throughout the first Avengers movie and Winter Soldier, and then seeing like S.H.I.E.L.D. be compromised, he's starting to feel a little wary about the government, and being put in check, and not really having like the freedom to choose as he says in the movie. So, that kind of makes them go, head to head with each other. So I think that's really good motivation for these two characters, and it really kind of begins their journeys, throughout this movie, and then Infinity War and Endgame, especially the very end. Yeah, and I think this is definitely like the most like action-packed movie of all of them. There's just like, action scene after action scene, like I mentioned like the battle in Lagos, and then we have like the whole battle in Bucharest, Romania, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, where Steve is actually confronting a Winter Soldier who's now become Bucky Barnes, and he's kind of regaining his senses again, and they have that whole confrontation where the police force is going after him because of the whole like bombing in Vienna. They did deduce it down that it was the Winter Soldier because spoiler, Baron Zemo had like the prosthetic of Bucky Barnes' face over him. So when they have like the kind of security footage of the Vienna UN bombing, they can see like someone who looks like Bucky Barnes. So the police force goes after him, and Steve Rogers knows that Bucky has to be innocent, so he kind of goes after him, gets there first, tells him about what's going on, and then the police force storm the apartment that he's in, and the whole like stairwell and roof chase battle. And then you have Black Panther in there as well, who's going after him because during the UN bombing scene, his father T'Chaka was killed in that. So now T'Challa now has become the Black Panther and become the new King of Wakanda, and kind of take the mantle. And now he has this vengeance towards the Winter Soldier. So his whole mission is to like go after him and bring him to justice. But I guess before I continue on into the action scenes, I guess I wanted to bring up like the characters that kind of get introduced in this one. You have T'Challa / Black Panther, and then later on Peter Parker / Spider-Man. And I think, honestly, just from my point of view, I think T'Challa was actually better in Civil War than he was in his own movie for Black Panther. I really think he really does feel like, the character from the comic books, at least in Civil War. I thought he was great in Black Panther, but I really feel like Chadwick Boseman really just like owned the performance. And I think because he was, like a supporting character, he didn't have the pressure of being like the main character of, the Black Panther movies. He can really just like come in, do his part, and just make an impact. So I really appreciated him for that, for sure. And then of course Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man was really great. I know there's this whole like kind of debacle that was going on between Sony and Disney of like having the rights to Spider-Man, and I know the Russos really like fought for Peter Parker to be in Civil War because in the comics he's very much like the kind of the game changer of that story. So I know it's really important for them and the writers to have him in this story, to kind of have like a third party of it, kind of like what they did with Black Panther, because with Black Panther they wanted to have like a third party who wasn't really involved in the whole divide between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark when it came to the Sokovia Accords. So they really wanted to have like kind of third party heroes within that battle. So I really appreciated that they did that, and the fact that they really wanted to push a younger Spider-Man, because I know like in the past we had like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and obviously they were like in their kind of 20s when they did those Spider-Man movies. But with this one, the Russos really wanted to have like a young teenage Spider-Man. So I think Tom Holland was like maybe like 17, 18 when he played the role. So yeah, he was perfect to play Spider-Man. And then obviously he gets spun off in Spider-Man Homecoming and then future Spider-Man movies. But this one was like his really cool introduction. And I thought he was great in the movie as well. And it really added a cool just like dynamic to the battle. And I'm glad they had a little tease at the end of like Spider-Man will return and everything, and then kind of continue on his relationship with Tony Stark and set up his relationship in Infinity War and Endgame as well. But yeah, then back to the action scenes, like they have that kind of tunnel chase where they're kind of like on foot, which is really cool. At first, Bucky Barnes is on his motorcycle, and then T'Challa like rips the motorcycle out from under him, and they have like the kind of foot chase. So you kind of have that shot of like Bucky, then Black Panther, and then Steve Rogers, and you can just see like how fast they are because they're both enhanced from their abilities. So it's really cool to see them just as I guess normal people just running and everything. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, they eventually capture Bucky, and they take him to that headquarters, and then we meet Everett Ross, who's kind of like the head of like the CIA and everything. They have that interrogation scene, and then again, spoiler alert, where Zemo kills the psychiatrist, and then takes the book that had all the trigger words that gets introduced at the beginning of the movie that kind of activates the Winter Soldier. So he's kind of reading off all the words, and then Bucky gets activated as a Winter Soldier, breaks out, and then we have that whole other action sequence where he's literally fighting half of the Avengers as he breaks out, and then he tries to steal the helicopter, and then we have that cool shot of Steve Rogers trying to grab onto the side of the helicopter, and then he has that kind of like pose position that everyone's like cheered about. I know the Roosters wanted to have that just to show like just how strong Captain America is, as a super soldier. And obviously probably Chris Evans wanted to do it just to show off like how much he worked out for this role and everything, which totally understandable. But yeah, they eventually get Bucky under control, and then Bucky tells him and Sam Wilson that he's not the only Winter Soldier, so they have to travel to the whole Winter Soldier compound. In order to do that, they have to get to the German airport. But then obviously that's when we have our whole big battle, which, is definitely the highlight of the story. We have like the two factions going against each other, and I can go on and on about it. But yeah, I know like when I was like in the theater, just seeing all that, seeing like the two sides like clash with each other, I know the Russo Brothers were really inspired by, like the whole splash page aspect where, the entire, like in the comics, they have the entire like 2 pages is just like one shot of like a whole action scene. I know they kind of built that up, especially in Endgame. They kind of want to keep that theme through. But yeah, it's just like super amazing. What else can I say about it, really? But then eventually, as the battle goes on, Rhodes is actually accidentally hit by Vision, who's actually trying to go after Bucky and Captain America as they kind of fly off in their jet. And then Rhodes slams down the ground and then gets paralyzed, and then that kind of ends the battle there, kind of makes it more personal. The story kind of goes on, and we kind of get to the very end where Captain America and Bucky and then secretly Black Panther make it to the Winter Soldier compound, and then they kind of look around and see that all the Winter Soldiers have been killed, been shot by Zemo, and then Iron Man comes in. They have their kind of like brief interaction, and they're kind of supposedly allying with each other. Zemo plays the footage of kind of what I was talking about earlier, of the whole assassination of Winter Soldier killing Tony Stark's parents. And obviously that makes it very personal. And then Tony Stark is like, it's like, did you know? Steve Rogers obviously says yes, and then that's what has that whole 3-way battle of like Captain America and Bucky going after Iron Man, and then Iron Man going after Bucky. And then, we get the whole iconic shot of Iron Man and Captain America going against each other. Iron Man shooting his lasers, and then Captain America has his shield up, and then they have that big whole clash. Bucky comes in, fights off Iron Man, but then Iron Man, blows off his arm, and he's about to kill him, but then Steve comes in and saves the day, and then, fights him off, uses the shield, and it's like smacking his chest, and then the arc reactor kind of turns off, and then the battle, is at a stalemate at that point, and then Steve and Bucky kind of go away, and then Tony Stark is like, you don't deserve that shield, my father made that shield, and then Steve drops the shield, and then that's the end of that, and then Iron Man is just kind of left there. But yeah, it's just like just action after action scene, a lot of like great just like character development. It really moves the MCU forward. This kicks off phase 3, and where the Avengers are disassembled, and then just before the greatest threat is looming in the distance with Thanos approaching, and then that kind of leads us into Infinity War. But yeah, I think there's just like a lot of like just drama, just a lot of great action, a lot of great character growth. A lot of characters kind of get back into the fold. We get Clint Barton, who was retired at the end of Age of Ultron, but then he kind of gets brought back in. And then we have Ant-Man, who was introduced in like the previous film, and he becomes obviously it's like the twist in the whole battle of him becoming Giant Man, and Spider-Man swinging around his legs with his web, and then he gets toppled over, and then he has a reference to Empire Strikes Back. It's like, have you seen that really old movie, Empire Strikes Back? That scene on the ice planet with the walking thingies? That was great. But yeah, he gets introduced, but then, at the very end, they get taken to the raft and they're in this prison. But then, since Steve Rogers was on the run, he kind of comes in and breaks them out. So that was a really cool tag at the very end of that one. And then half the Avengers are on the run, and then some of the Avengers are kind of like left limping. And then Bucky is eventually sent to Wakanda, where he's kind of like put to sleep again. And then, that kind of sets up the events for Black Panther. Yeah, and I guess just another like quick thing I wanted to say was just like I really appreciated the writers and the directors balancing of the cast and the characters. There's like as these movies goes on, like the cast kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but you really feel like there's really good balance between all the characters and their storylines. Like you don't really feel like overwhelmed. I know some critics criticize the movie for that, where like there's just like too many characters, too many action scenes. As you watch the movies go on and you kind of stick with it chronologically, you see that they really do carry over storylines from previous films. And I think like the one thing about these movies is that you can't really watch them in isolation, especially Civil War and then Infinity War and Endgame. You can't just like go into them not knowing any of the canon that came before, because you have to know like what Steve Rogers has been going through, what Tony Stark's been going through, and then you have to see like their clash, as their storylines continue, and then how they kind of get twisted at the very end of this one. I think that they really do a good job, and this is more like a television series. The Russo Brothers, coming from television, like Arrested Development and Community and like other shows that they've done, they really know how to kind of draw a story out and kind of make it more serialized, so that you don't just watch a movie in isolation. You have to come into it realizing that that there was stuff that comes before it, and that's setting up future aspects of it. So I really appreciated that they want to bring that kind of serialized storytelling from television into the films, so that people can like really be engaged. I was reading like an interview that they were really wanting to have reason to bring people into the theater, continue that theater going experience, and with these kind of big blockbusters. And one aspect to do that is to have kind of characters that you want to see what happens next with them. You don't want to just like go have like a fun time and then just leave and not remember what's going on. Like you want to kind of go in kind of seeing the continuation of the storylines that these characters have established, and then wonder like what's going next, and then theorize in between the movies, like like on the internet or whatever, of like, hey, what's going to happen next? I don't know, what do you think is going to happen next? So they kind of want to create this kind of fan engagement, because that I was watching another interview of like they were huge fans of like Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and once they left the theater, like they didn't really have this kind of global community around them, because they didn't have social media back then, so they would only just talk about it amongst each other. So now that we are living in an age where there's like social media, where you can talk to people like in like India and Japan and Europe and all these other places, now you can have this kind of global community to like talk about movies, talk about these characters, and talk about theories of like where these storylines are going to go. So yeah, I really appreciate that they really took the time to bring that kind of serialization into their storytelling, and kind of balance out the characters, and have you care about them as their storylines move forward in future films. All right, now we move on to Avengers Infinity War. As the Russo Brothers films go on, I think I enjoy them more and more and more. This is definitely the film where it's just like a non-stop action scene after action scene. I know like some people criticized it because it's just kind of relentless pace, and which I understand, because I know that initially like this was supposed to be like Infinity War Part 1 and 2, and then as time went on, Kevin Feige and the Russos realized that this really just has to be like one self-contained film, where has a beginning, middle, and end, and then Infinity War Part 2 is its own thing, which eventually became Avengers Endgame, which we'll get to in a bit. They really are kind of like distinct films, Infinity War and Endgame. So I appreciated the fact that they kind of made this more like a self-contained story, and the fact that there's like 6 Infinity Stones, and Thanos at the very end of Age of Ultron finally gets the gauntlet, which is apparently just a fake one as I was reading about, and the real one was the one assembled by Eitri, the dwarf lord that Thor, Rocket, and Groot interact with on Nidavellir. So yeah, really this is just kind of Thanos' mission to kind of collect all 6 Infinity Stones, and obviously has a snap at the very end, and then half of the universe gets wiped out. So this is really kind of like his moral mission, not just like be a crazy villain and annihilate half the universe, but really his mission is to bring balance, perfectly balanced as all things should, because he has this whole backstory of his home on Titan, the planet Titan, how it was very overpopulated, and all the resources were depleted, and people were just dying left and right. So he didn't want that to kind of be the future for the universe, so he kind of made his mission to figure out a way to kind of make things more balanced. So he kind of thought in his mind to kind of wipe out half the universe, so that people can have like more like food and clear skies and all this stuff, which I know some people have a problem with. They're just like, wait, instead of like wiping out half the universe, why don't you just double the resources? But I don't think that's really the point that he was trying to make. I think there's like a lot of issues with overpopulation, and trying to figure out like how these resources are going to be distributed, kind of like even in our own world. Because I know like a lot of people like agree with his mission. A lot of people have like the hashtag Thanos is right, and I guess yeah, it's just kind of like that moral dilemma of like, how do you find a way to like help the universe? Do you try to find a way to like wipe out half the universe, and so that people can won't have overpopulation, and there will be a more equal distribution of resources, or what do you do? So yeah, I think that's kind of like the moral dilemma that a lot of characters in this one have, especially with Gamora being Thanos' daughter, her being the victim of Thanos' invasion of her home planet and like killing off half of her people, and then him explaining that little kind of device on his finger to have everything balanced. So yeah, it's definitely like a moral question that is like, it's very like interesting perspective that people have. But yeah, I think that's something that really gets explored in this movie, and that's just something that all the characters grapple with. And then obviously with all the Avengers like trying to prevent him from doing this, you can obviously see they're on the side of saving half the universe. They don't really see his perspective, but I know the writers were trying to write Thanos as the protagonist of this story. So even if you don't agree with him, you still see his perspective and his point of view. Obviously he has the most screen time, and then with this story, kind of bounces back and forth between different Avengers, which is something that they really wanted to do, because speaking of balanced, there's obviously like so many characters in this movie, and I think originally they were just wanting them all to be kind of in the same room, but they then realized like not everyone will have like a line to say, and not everyone will have anything to do really. So they decided to have kind of split up the parties and like pair certain Avengers with other Avengers, because I was a big fan of the first Avengers movie, seeing these kind of different movies and franchises come together. So it was really cool seeing like Tony Stark paired with Doctor Strange, or paired up with Spider-Man, and then eventually meeting with the Guardians, like half the Guardians, with like Peter Quill, Drax, and Mantis, and then the other Guardians, like Rocket and Groot meeting up with Thor and going to like Niamh, and then the rest of the Avengers characters, meeting up like with the Wakandans. So I remember when I was watching them in the theater, it was just like really, really mind blowing seeing all these different characters interact, from phase 2, and then part of phase 3, finally interact with each other to take on this great threat with Thanos. So yeah, I think that's like a really cool thing that the writers did, is they were able to perfectly balance everything with the characters, have their own storylines, and then some of them don't even really reunite until Endgame, after half of them are wiped out, and then you kind of have like the surviving members coming together to take on the threat. But we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, just to jump into like the action scenes, like it just starts off with Thor and Loki's ship just being attacked by Thanos' ship, because we kind of got that tease at the very end credit scene of Thor Ragnarok, where you think like everything's, or not necessarily everything's happy, but like half of the Asgardians were taken off Asgard after Surtur put a sword in it and blew everything up, and Thor was saying like, we'll rebuild, Asgard isn't as a place, as a people, and so they kind of like fly off into space, and they to find a new home, and then you think everything's gonna be good, but then at the end of the credits, Thanos' ship rises up, and then Thor and Loki are just like oh shoot. Because at the very end of Thor Ragnarok, Loki stole the Tesseract, and obviously within the Tesseract is one of the Infinity Stones, so that's the reason why Thanos is after them. And then you find out that he wiped out Xandar to get the Power Stone, and then wiped out all the rest of the Asgardians to get the Space Stone, and everyone's kind of like all hands on deck trying to defeat Thanos. Hulk tries to go after him, but Thanos like defeats him. Thor tries to go after him, but obviously Thanos defeats him, and like Ebony Maw uses his kind of like telekinesis to have that metal all wrapped around him. Loki tries to go after him by pretending to offer him the Tesseract, and then having the knife to try to stab him, but then Thanos uses his Infinity Gauntlet and the Power Stone to like freeze him, grabs Loki by the throat and then chokes him to death. So Loki gets killed, Heimdall gets killed, for using the Bifrost to send Hulk to Earth. So yeah, just right from the beginning, it really just kind of sets the tone of like, oh shoot, okay, Thanos is like a real threat. He's got 2 Infinity Stones, he wiped out nearly all of Thor's people, and then Hulk smashes down to Earth, in the Sanctum Sanctorum when he meets with Doctor Strange and Wong, and then they obviously recruit Tony Stark, and then we have another action scene where Ebony Maw and Corvus Glaive come and they're looking for the Time Stone because it was revealed in Doctor Strange that Doctor Strange has the Time Stone within the Eye of Agamotto, and so they're after him, and they have the whole battle, and then in that giant donut ship that comes down, and then we finally see Spider-Man, Peter Parker in the bus with Ned, and then the hair on his arms pop up. That was the first indication that he's using a spider sense, which is really cool. And then Spider-Man gets involved into the fight. Then Doctor Strange is captured by Ebony Maw and taken up into the ship, and then Tony Stark and Spider-Man have to go after him. So they have their whole adventure in space, and then meanwhile on Earth, Bruce Banner meets up with the rest of the Avengers later on, and then we kind of cut to Edinburgh with Vision and Wanda, and obviously Vision has the Mind Stone within his forehead, which gets established in Age of Ultron, where Loki's scepter is broken, which was introduced in the first Avengers movie, and Ultron puts it in the synthetic body that Vision is in to kind of power him up. So now he has an Infinity Stone. So the other children of Thanos go after him, and they fight Wanda, and then eventually Steve Rogers and Falcon and Black Widow come in and save the day, and then that whole epic reveal where Steve Rogers comes out of the shadows and the Avengers score comes on, which is really cool. They fight them off and they get away, and then they kind of all meet up at the Avengers compound, and they realize that Vision has to go to Wakanda. They figure out that Shuri, who was introduced in Black Panther, can find a way to remove the Mind Stone from him safely without killing him. And then we have the whole Battle of Wakanda, where the children of Thanos are kind of going after the Infinity Stone, and then meanwhile in space, they have a whole action scene of the Guardians kind of going after Thanos, who kind of just picked up the Reality Stone and wiped out Nowhere and wiped out the Collector to pick that up. So now he has more stones, kidnaps Gamora. They go to Vormir. She tosses her off the side of the cliff. She dies, and then he finally gets the Soul Stones. Now he has 4 Infinity Stones, goes to Titan, battles the Avengers who are on there, and eventually gets the Time Stone after his whole battle with Tony Stark. And Doctor Strange is saying that just spare his life and I'll give him the stone. Eventually gives him the Time Stones. Now he has 5 stones. Goes to Battle of Wakanda, fights off the Avengers, tries to battle Vision, and then Wanda's trying to stop him. And then the whole thing of Wanda holding off Thanos and then firing her power at Vision to kind of destroy the stone. And you think everything's all good now. Thanos is 1 stone short, and the day is saved even though Vision had to sacrifice himself. But then the whole twist of Thanos, he has the Time Stone, reverses time, Vision is reassembled, rips the stone out of his forehead, puts in the gauntlet. Now he has all 6 stones, and Thor tries to kill him by putting the axe in his chest, and then the whole line of you should have gone for the head, and then snap, and then half the universe disintegrates. So not only there's a lot of good action, but there's a lot of good drama. I think just another good theme is the whole theme of sacrifice, kind of like what I was saying earlier. A lot of people sacrificing their lives for the stone. Loki sacrificing himself for Thor, and then Thanos eventually getting the Space Stone, and then Gamora sacrificing her life to get the Soul Stone, which kind of gets carried on in Endgame with the whole scene with Natasha and Barton, which we'll get to later. But yeah, I know this kind of gets established in this one where, in order to get something, you have to sacrifice something. So I thought that was really cool aspect to the story. With Vision giving up his life to get the Mind Stone, Vision's willing to sacrifice himself, blow up the stone within his forehead to stop Thanos from getting it, which is a really cool theme as well of these characters really care about each other. They're willing to give up their lives for their friends, how far these characters are going to prevent sacrifice of other characters. And another thing I just want to talk about was just Josh Brolin's performance as Thanos. I thought it was a really cool addition to the cast. I know his character was first introduced at the end of the first Avengers movie, where his character is talking to the other, and the other is saying to challenge them is to court death. And then Thanos has his whole turn to the camera and then has a smile, which is played by another actor who was actually a stunt performer in Civil War. And then we replaced him with Josh Brolin, and he was introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think he was a really good addition, especially that voice, and he has kind of that epic jawline and all this stuff. And I know he was doing motion capture and voice on the set, and I know he's probably feeling insecure wearing those pajamas and the whole helmet rig with the dots on his face. But yeah, I thought his performance was great, and like the visual effects were great. There's like some shots where like it looks very like realistic, and like the texturing on his face and everything like that. But yeah, I thought he was definitely a standout in this movie, and the fact that like kind of like what I was saying earlier about like he's like the protagonist of this movie was like a really cool aspect. So yeah, that's something that I definitely enjoyed about his performance for sure. Yeah, and lastly, I just wanted to kind of talk about the comedy in the movie as well. I think like something that really stands out is like Thor's interaction with Rocket and Groot, kind of like their jokes and everything, or even like the scenes between Star-Lord and Thor, where it's like, are you copying me? He's trying to copy me. There's just so many great lines, especially with the Guardians, because I know James Gunn was an executive producer on this movie, and he kind of was like a really good like creative consultant during this, and Taika Waititi was also very instrumental as well. Just coming off of Thor Ragnarok, he wanted to kind of have like a lot of good comedy in there. So I really think like that whole between the Guardians and Thor, there's definitely a lot of like comedy in there. Then obviously you still have like the drama that the Russos brought on from like Winter Soldier and Civil War. But I think kind of like I was saying before, it's perfectly balanced, as all things should. And then some like really cool like funny scenes with Tony Stark and Peter, and then Peter and Doctor Strange. Like there's like just really cool. It really reminded me of like the first Avengers movie, where you kind of have like these kind of clash of egos, and the comedy that you get from there. The Russo Brothers, coming from comedies, especially Community and Arrested Development, like I said before, they really know how to work with like ensemble casts and like have all the characters have like their moment to shine. All right, now we come to Avengers Endgame, and this is like the big grand finale of Phase 3 and the Infinity Saga. Right off the bat, we kind of have like the characters reeling from the events of Infinity War, where Thanos had the snap and then wiped out half the universe. The whole cold open with Hawkeye, doing like archery with his daughter, and then he's like turning around, like talking to like with his family about like, hey, what do you want in your hot dog, and all this stuff. He turns back around, and then his daughters fade away. He like runs around the barn area looking for her, and then goes to like the picnic table and sees like his wife and two sons disappeared as well, which like really is like good motivator for his scene when he's reintroduced later on in Japan, where he has like that sword fight with that kind of mob boss. I know that was like a theme that the producers and the writers wanted to have. Them being fathers themselves, it's like, what would you do if you lost your entire family, lost your kids? You'd be kind of self-destructive as well. So Hawkeye goes off the walls and becomes the sort of like Ronin character, which is explained later on. But yeah, it really just like sets the tone. I think something that I really appreciate about this movie is that it takes its time. Some people were critical of Infinity War about like how it was like really relentless, and there was just like nonstop action, and you don't really have like time for the characters to breathe. Which is understandable. There's like, between Infinity War and Endgame, Infinity War definitely has a lot more action throughout, and just like a couple character moments, like quiet moments between the characters. But since it was like a heist movie that was inspired by 1990s smash and grab type heist movies, like Out of Sight or something. But yeah, with this one, especially the first hour, is just a little bit more somber, a little bit more kind of slower in tone, but which is not a bad thing at all. It kind of like, it takes its time to build up, and then like the Avengers eventually reuniting, and then having this plan to like go to Titan to find the Infinity Stones, defeat Thanos, and then kind of reverse the snap, and to bring everybody back. They storm Thanos' like retirement home, like they cut off his arm that has the gauntlet on it, and then Rocket flips it over, and they see that like all the Infinity Stones have been disintegrated, and they're asking like, where are the stones, what'd you do with them? And he says like, I used the stones to destroy the stones, I am inevitable, now the work is done. I thought that was like really cool twist. It's like, oh shoot, now what are we gonna do? Because I know like the Russos and Kevin Feige and like the writers, like they talked with one of the producers, her name was like Trin Tran, and she was just frustrated. She was like, why don't you just like kill them off? And then the writers got really inspired by that, because it would really like make the situation even more dire, where they kind of have this hope at the very beginning that they're gonna defeat Thanos and get the Infinity Gauntlet and like reverse the snap and bring everybody back. But then it's just like, oh man, now what do we do? And then Thor slices off Thanos' head, and then the whole reference to Infinity War is like, it's like, what'd you do? It's like, I went for the head. And then kind of walks out the barn. They're all kind of like, what do we do now? And then it fades to black, and then we have the 5 years later caption. And I think everyone in the audience was like, what? So Yeah, I thought that was like a really interesting twist for sure. And then, as the story goes on, it just shows like very quiet scenes of, like Captain America and like that kind of group therapy with the other survivors, talking about their experiences of like losing people and, how they have to move on. And, Captain America saying, he's like, you gotta move on. Gotta move on. But even like you can see in his face, like he doesn't even believe it himself. Another thing that I really appreciate about this movie is that it really focuses on the six Avengers, where all of them are kind of dealing with their form of grief in a way, where Captain America and Black Widow kind of like bargaining in a way where there's like, oh, maybe there's still hope, maybe we can still have these missions around the galaxy. Like they're having missions with War Machine and Captain Marvel and Okoye and Rocket, of like different missions across the galaxy to find some hope. But even they're kind of like struggling with that. You have Tony Stark, who feels like acceptance, and Hulk as well. They feel acceptance. Tony Stark, married Pepper Potts, and then they had their daughter Morgan, and he's trying to have like this life of retirement. And then Hulk has this whole kind of like resolution of having this balance between he put the brains and the bronze together. So he has like Professor Hulk persona now, and then you have the other characters who are kind of like off the deep end. Thor, now he's like Fat Thor, Lebowski Thor, which I thought was pretty funny. I know, like when I saw it in theaters, like everyone's kind of like shocked where Rocket and Hulk kind of go to his place in New Asgard, and then he kind of turns around and he's revealed to be Fat Thor. Everyone's like, everyone's shocked about that. But he feels like he's a failure, like he should have went for the head the first time before Thanos did the snap, and he feels like really responsible for that. So he's like off the deep end, and then the opposite, where Clint Barton is feeling anger, so he's taking out that anger by like taking out these different like mobs in Japan and in like Mexico and all these other places, and kind of going off the deep end. So yeah, I really appreciate that it really kind of comes back full circle to like the first Avengers movie, where it's about those six characters coming together to fight this evil, where now it's like these six characters are like surviving, and like what they do after this big evil has won, and the steps they take to figure out what's going on. But then you have the whole twist of the rat sculling across like the dashboard of the van that was introduced in Ant-Man the Wasp, of Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne and Hank Pym and Janet, putting that kind of quantum realm technology within the van. So now it's it's like you can have like the quantum realm technology like on the go. But at the end of that movie, he gets sent into the quantum realm to kind of get like the Pym particles and all that. And then after Thanos has a snap, Janet, Hope, and Hank get disintegrated, so he's trapped within the quantum realm. Well, 5 years goes by, outside the quantum realm. Inside it's just been 5 hours. And then when the rat skulls across the dashboard, press the button, he gets launched out, and then he realizes like, wait, what's going on, what's happening? And then he realizes that it's been 5 years, half the population has been disintegrated, and the survivors have been aged 5 years. And then when he goes to his house and sees Cassie Lang, she's 5 years older, he's like obviously devastated that he missed 5 years, and he tries to figure out what's going on. So then he eventually goes to Captain America and Black Widow, and then kind of starts the ball rolling to kind of get people recruited onto this whole time heist idea of like using the quantum realm to go back in time, gather all the Infinity Stones again, and then do the snap again, and then bring everybody back. So that's kind of like the rest of the first half. And then eventually Act 2 is like all the time heist. They finally recruited Tony Stark, who eventually creates the machine that creates the time travel. They recruit the Hulk, which is another funny scene of him in the shop, and then talking with Ant-Man, and then the fans coming in, they're like, oh, you guys are Hulk fans, it's okay, I'm Ant-Man, like who? And all that. They eventually recruit Thor after his whole funny scene of being Fat Thor, playing Fortnite with Korg and Meek. Black Widow recruits Hawkeye after his whole kind of sword battle in Japan. So you have like the original six Avengers, and then the other surviving members, Nebula, War Machine, Rocket, and then eventually have like Act 2 is a whole time heist where like they're doing the whole plan. I think that's something that I was really like appreciate about this movie is like the fact that they keep kind of bouncing between different timelines, and you kind of see something that the Russos and the writers themselves like were wanting to do is kind of see the same movie from like a different point of view. So you have Captain America, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and Hulk revisiting the first Avengers movie, and seeing like that different perspective of like the Battle of New York, and them trying to find Loki's scepter, which gets intercepted by Rumlow and Sitwell, which Captain America eventually intercepts, because he says, it's like, don't worry, Hail Hydra. which is like kind of like a double reference. Like not only is it a reference to the fact that this is like the future Captain America who knows that Hydra was inside Shield the whole time, but also a reference to like the comic books where they kind of do like a what if of like if Captain America was recruited by Hydra. So I thought that was really cool. So they intercept the scepter, but then they try to go after the Tesseract. But then, the Hulk being the Hulk, he knocks it out of Tony Stark's hand, and then Loki grabs it, and then it kind of spins off into the Loki show. And then Tony Stark and Captain America have to go back to like 1970s to the base camp. And then not only do they have to get the Tesseract, but also have to get the new Pym particles. So then Tony Stark gets the Tesseract, interacts with his dad, kind of has that whole resolution of, because him being a father, and then, having that kind of awkward relationship with his own father, which gets kind of resolved in this one, I thought was really cool. And then Steve Rogers gets the Pym particles, sees Peggy Carter in the distance. So that kind of reignites that passion that he has that was established in First Avenger, and then kind of gets brought up in like Winter Soldier when he's interacting with old Peggy, and then in Civil War where she actually passes away. So that kind of sets up the events for the end of Endgame. And then, Hulk is interacting with the Ancient One, and then kind of gets the Time Stone from her, 'cause she's like wearing it, the Eye of Agamotto, and then tells him that it's like, okay, well, if you do remove these Time Stones from here, you have to bring him back. And then Hulk obviously gives that whole promise that he will. So they have those Infinity Stones, and then you have War Machine and Nebula going after the Power Stones. So they go back to 2014, punch out Star-Lord, and then go into that tomb and then get the Power Stone. But then as soon as they try to go back to the present, Nebula kind of gets intercepted, like her whole wiring gets messed up, and then she's kind of like passes out, and then gets kidnapped by 2014 Thanos and Gamora to figure out like what's going on. And then they have the whole switcheroo with 2014 Nebula going back to the present instead to summon Thanos' ship for the final battle. But then meanwhile you have Rocket and Thor going back to the Thor Dark World era, 2013, and extracting the Reality Stone from Jane Foster, which we don't see because we don't really get like how it goes from like a liquid to a stone, which they kind of joke about in the movie, because I know originally they weren't really wanting the ether to be a stone, but then as time went on, Kevin Feige really wanted these kind of different Easter eggs to be stones. So like the scepter became the Mind Stone, and then the ether became the Reality Stone, and so on and so forth. And even like the Power Stone wasn't supposed to be the Power Stone; it was supposed to be like a completely different stone. But then they, in post production, they changed it to like a purple tint to make it into the Power Stone. So I thought that was pretty funny how that kind of continuity all worked out. Even with like the Infinity Gauntlet, because there's like an Easter egg in the first Thor movie of like the Infinity Gauntlet. It's all like assembled with all the stones inside of it, and then they realize, oh shoot, they can't have the Infinity Gauntlet like already assembled. So in Thor Ragnarok, when Hela breaks into the kind of like a treasure chamber, she's like fake, and then throws off the side, and it gets destroyed. And then we realize that the actual Infinity Gauntlet is the one that was created by Eitri that gets introduced in Infinity War. So they get the Reality Stone, and then of course the tragic scene of Clint and Natasha going to Vormir to figure out like where the Soul Stone is. And then they meet up with Red Skull, who survived from the first Avengers movie, but after getting like sucked up in that portal after holding the Tesseract, they realize that in order to get the Soul Stone, they have to trade a soul for a soul. So they have the whole fight of like who's gonna sacrifice themselves. And then Clint kind of goes off the side, but then Natasha grabs onto him, attaches him to the harness, so then he's like all stuck on there. And then he grabs Natasha's hand, and then Natasha's like, let me go. And then like Clint's like, no, don't do it. And then she pulls herself away, falls off the side of the cliff, dies. And then Clint wakes up in like that kind of like ocean area with the Soul Stone. Then everyone kind of returns to the present, and they realize like, Clint, where's Nat? They realize that Natasha sacrificed herself for the Soul Stone. And then Clint and Captain America are saying that they can't let her die for nothing. They have to make this chance count. And then Cap's like, yeah, we will. So then Iron Man, Hulk, and Rocket make their own Infinity Gauntlet, put the stones in, and then since the Infinity Stone are mostly gamma radiation, the Hulk is the only one who can kind of resist that the most. So then he does the snap, and they realize like, oh, do we do it? But then in the next room, Nebula summons Thanos' ship, comes in, destroys the Avengers complex, and then we have that whole final battle. of the small group of Avengers going against Thanos, and half the Avengers are like under the compound, like as it's like coming down, like they're drowning, all this stuff. Like the other half of the Avengers are like going after Thanos, and like obviously he wipes them out, one by one. He gets rid of like Iron Man, he gets rid of Thor. Thor drops his hammer, and then Captain America summons Mjolnir, which is like a really epic moment. Has this whole battle, but then Mjolnir is like knocked out of his hand. He gets the shield that gets destroyed by his whole like Thanos' spinning sword thing. Thanos summons his entire army, and you have Captain America still, being the soldier, putting on like half of his shield, I can do this all day, his whole mentality, right when you think, all hope is lost, and you suddenly hear on your left, turns around, portal shows up, and then we get into that epic scene of like, one by one, the Avengers showing up again. You have like Falcon, you have the Guardians, you have Doctor Strange, you have Spider-Man, the Ice Guardians, the Wakandans, like all coming in, Bucky, Groot, all of them. And like I just remember being in the theater and like everyone was just like cheering every time a new Avengers character came in. So that was definitely very epic for sure. And then obviously the whole final battle, Captain America was like, Avengers, assemble. And then they all just run, and they have the whole clash. They kind of have like the whole kind of hot potato of Clint having the Infinity Gauntlet, trying to get away from like the 2014 Nebula, and they have a whole confrontation because, as the story went on, Nebula kind of had her whole character arc of going from evil to being good, and then kind of convinces 2014 Gamora to fight against Thanos and Nebula, so they have the whole redemption arc. And present day Nebula shoots 2014 Nebula. Clint gets the Infinity Gauntlet away, passes it to Black Panther. Black Panther passes it to Spider-Man. Spider-Man passes it to like Captain Marvel. Like they have their whole battle. Despite how powerful Captain Marvel is, she's not powerful enough. And eventually Thanos gets the gauntlet, puts it on. And Iron Man swoops in, has their whole battle, and then secretly he removes the stones from the gauntlet. So then when you think Thanos is like, I am inevitable, and like goes in for the snap, like nothing happens, and he's like, what the heck? And then they cut to Iron Man, and then you see the stones kind of forming onto his glove for the Iron Man suit, and he's like, and I am Iron Man. Snap, all Thanos' army disintegrates. The battle is won, but then at the cost of Tony Stark's life. So I think it's a really good full circle moment where, this whole MCU started with Iron Man saying, I am Iron Man, starting the whole, superhero phenomenon and everything. And, I think like it's very poetic. The last thing that Tony Stark says is, I am Iron Man. And I know like the Russo Brothers originally and the writers originally didn't want him to have a line, but the editor Jeffrey Ford said, I think you should have a line. So they have him say, I am Iron Man, and they had a whole pickup shoot of him saying that. And I think it was also really cool that at the very end, originally he was supposed to kind of maybe like say some lines when Pepper and Peter and War Machine walk up to him, but then Robert Downey Jr. was like no, I don't want to say anything. I want my last line to be I am Iron Man, and then that's it. Like I guess he does mutter like Pep, but then after that Iron Man dies, gives his life, sacrifices himself, and now the universe is saved. And now the Avengers can kind of live on in their own lives, and obviously we'll get that rolls on to Phase 4. But at least for this one, I think Endgame was definitely just like a good just wrap up and finale for the Infinity Saga. And really in my mind, I really feel like that's like the definitive ending of the MCU. Like we'll see what happens with Phase 5. I mean, you already know my thoughts on Phase 4 if you've seen my previous videos. Very hit or miss phase where there's not really a lot of consistency. So I hope for Phase 5 they kind of get the ball rolling with kind of connecting the dots a little bit more, and hopefully like in King Dynasty and Secret Wars, things will kind of get wrapped up in a way. But for this one, for Phase 3, I really feel like this is like the definitive ending. All the characters get wrapped up. Captain America, returns the stones to their different timelines, so then everything's all resolved. And then, he eventually goes back to the 1940s and finally has his dance with Peggy Carter that he promised her at the end of the first Avenger. And so I thought that was really cool tie up to that storyline where he finally gets to retire, because his whole character that was established in that movie was he's very he's a soldier, he's willing to sacrifice his life, he's willing to give everything up in his personal life for the cause. And his whole arc is to instead of like, fighting for others, he has to, fight for himself eventually, and it's okay that, he's selfish for a little bit, and, he has his own wants and needs. So, he retires, has his dance with Peggy Carter, and then present day old Cap passes on the shield to Sam Wilson, and then, that kind of spins off into Falcon and Winter Soldier. And then, the other characters, like Thor, realizing that, he has to be who he wants to be instead of like what others expect him to be. And he kind of passes on the mantle to Valkyrie to be the kind of the king of Asgard. He kind of rolls off with the Guardians and becomes as Guardians of the Galaxy. And we all know what happens in Thor Love and Thunder, which if you want to see my thoughts on that, watch my review for that one. And then Clint Barton is free to retire and goes back to his family and like reunite with them. So that's a good full circle moment. And then the other Avengers, like Von Maximoff and all of them are free to do their own like Disney Plus spin-offs and all that. But if Endgame were to be like the last movie, like I would be totally fine with that. I feel like it really just kind of cements the ending a little bit more, and kind of just brings more like importance to this movie as being the definitive ending for the Infinity Saga, and in my opinion for the MCU. So yeah, I really appreciate the Russos for sticking the landing. I know like this was subtitled like Mary Lou because like Mary Lou was like a Olympian, I think she's like a gymnast or something, and she had to like stick the landing, so they kind of subtitled this movie Mary Lou because they had to stick the landing with Endgame. And I appreciate it for sure, and I think a lot of other people do. I know people probably had like their nitpicks and stuff with this movie, but I really enjoy it. There's a reason why it's like the second highest grossing movie of all time, $2.9 billion at the box office, because people just keep wanting to go see that movie again and again and see the definitive ending of these characters. So I definitely appreciate it for sure. And that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Like, this is really fun kind of going through like a specific filmography review, especially Marvel, because I love Marvel so much. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of complete Marvel filmography reviews, maybe I'll do like John Watts or Jon Favreau or Taika Waititi or Ryan Coogler or whoever, Sam Raimi. But yeah, if you want to see more of those, comment below and say which one's your favorite. And yeah, also comment below saying which is your favorite Russo Marvel movie. But yeah, thank you again so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye.